guest with us today, Brian of London, same as Jesus of Nazareth is how he put it. He's not in London, he's of London. He now lives in Tel Aviv. He's a blogger on Israeli Cool. He's all over the place on social media. Huge Zionist, I'm a big fan of his. I feel like I already know him, even though this is the first time we've met face to face. Brian, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me here. I love coming up to Jerusalem and being here with two rabbis, because I don't spend enough time with rabbis, actually. Living in Tel Aviv in Sin City over there.
Well, I'll tell you, before you came in, I was speaking with Brian, and he told me that he sort of swore to himself that he's going to take a little bit of a break from Islam because he spent so much time. And then he heard our radio program with Imam Anjem Choudary, and what is this compulsion about, Brian? What is your deal with Islam?
There is no compulsion in religion, as I read in Jonathan Sachs's book one time. I don't know.
Tell that to Anjem Choudary.
I will. I picked a bad week to give up talking about Islam, it would appear. Yeah, no, I got my start in blogging after 9/11 and starting to look critically and reading books about Islam by ex-Muslims. Actually, was the best ones that I read, and I just wound up going down this rabbit hole of trying to understand what was going on in our world because
there's so many of them.
There's so many of them, and it appears to be so complicated, and this one tells you this story, and this one says it's peaceful, and this one says other. So I went down a rabbit hole. Okay, yeah. So it captivated me, and then I discovered it was just too much negativity, and I had to back off a little bit. And that's when I started doing more of the Israel stuff.
Too much negativity coming from Islam or from you towards Islam? You were getting negative.
That I was immersing myself in something that was not bright and wasn't leading me to happy places. And so I did tone it down a little bit, but I'm left with
beheadings and lashings. It's not fun for you.
Yeah, no,
that's not a
really
bright spot in your life.
I don't click on those links anymore. I really don't. I did at one time. I watched all the videos. I don't want to see them, right. But I want to know. It's very important that we know that they are happening.
Sure. I mean, in fact, most of my liberal-leaning friends, the ones that are, peace, love, everywhere, I ask all of them, have you ever watched one of the beheading videos? Never do they watch it. They don't want to watch it because it's almost like I don't want to think that really exists. And it's important for people to know that it really exists. And it's not that far. It's like a few miles north of us here in Syria. Churches are being turned into torture chambers. But what was it about the Anjem Choudary video that got you all lit up again?
Well, Anjem Choudary, okay. People get upset in the UK when he's given the oxygen of publicity. Especially there is a bank of Muslims who get upset when Anjem Choudary comes on because they say he doesn't represent our faith. And I don't want to get into the theology. I'm not here, and we shouldn't be here to tell Muslims what Islam is or isn't. And
I totally agree with that.
Barack Obama shouldn't stand up and say Islam is or Islam isn't, because what is he to know?
Well, some people would say that he would be able and has the right to do it as a card-carrying member. Not that I'm saying that, but many people do make that claim that he would be a card-carrying member of that faith.
Can you imagine anyone saying that? That's not Judaism. Meaning, if you're a Jew, you're a Jew, and that's what you believe. Or a Reformed Jew and a Satmar Chassid are both Jews, and no one says about the other, that's not Judaism. No, they're all forms of Judaism, and there is this form of Islam that is not Sufi, that is radical, that is violent, and it's important that we know, yes, that is indeed Islam. It's a brand of Islam, it's a vision of Islam, and there are thousands, if not millions, of people that adhere to it, support it, like it. They're not necessarily all jihad. They're not going to run out and actually stab the people, but there'll be the ones that go like this.
Yeah, but there are tens of millions that actually would be willing to and encourage and educate their children to. But one thing that the Imam said when we were speaking with him, he said, you cannot judge Islam based on Muslims and what they do. You judge it based on the religion. And I think it's actually just the reverse.
Exactly.
I think the truth is that you can judge Islam, you can judge Judaism, less based on biblical texts and this says what, but what is actually happening on the ground, what the people actually do, how it manifests itself in humanity. So yes, you can look and say, oh, well, doesn't the Jewish Bible say? Yes, but the Jewish Bible says a lot of things, and the rabbinical oral Torah application of it, makes it such that it would be difficult for me to find one time in all of Jewish history that a homosexual was killed for being a homosexual. In all of Jewish history, such a thing. And for him to say such a thing when homosexuals were probably 100 hung just yesterday throughout the Muslim world, and for him to say that is just beyond.
Well, let's go another step away from that and say, I don't want to judge Islam. Okay, it's too big a thing to judge. Let's judge the sociology of the people who are doing either good things or bad things. But when you meet someone like Anjem Choudary, who is very, very clear, and he's quite open and honest in his internal feelings and how they come out, what he thinks he must do based on the scriptures he reads, I take that very seriously, because it doesn't appear that he's a fringe, because we've got these people running around next to us in Syria and Iraq following exactly the examples that he's talking about, and they are doing things. So I'm more interested in the point where people pick up arms and want to stab me. That is how I'm going to have to regard. And Israel, we've tried for, since the founding of the state to believe that we're not fighting a religious war. We've tried to believe that it is an argument over land and control and so on, but it isn't. We can see that we've given everything sequentially that we could, and now we're left here. We've still got this belligerent neighbor. They haven't toned it down. They're still fighting us, and we've got to come to the conclusion at some point we have disturbed the honor of Islam just by existing.
Well, I'll tell you something about Anjem Choudary that gets me thinking. He's educated. He's a lawyer. He's intelligent. He's articulate. He's living in a free democracy in England, and those are his views. You can only imagine what the Muslim in Afghanistan living in a mountaintop, what he believes, or what the Muslim in the desert Sahara believes without any education. He's reading the text of the Quran saying, go and kill the infidel. And he's like, yes, absolutely, that's what I will do. If an educated Muslim in free England is able to come to such conclusions, you can only just imagine what our neighbors in Syria think.
That's right. It's a religious issue. It's an ideological issue. But that's why I found him disingenuous, because he was talking, when we talk about the Israel-Palestinian issue, he says, oh, that's very rich. I like the way he said rich. I actually want to take that from him and use that word. When someone's like, that's very rich for the state of Israel that was founded upon rape and the rape of a nation and the massacre and brutality. And I'm hearing him say that, and he advocates. I want to say, as if you have a problem with that, but then that would make it seem like I'm admitting that we're true, doing that, right? Which is not true. But who is he to come against and speak against massacres and brutality when he himself is advocating it? There's something very disingenuous and hypocritical about that.
There is, but there's no point talking to him about history. Okay, his view of history is totally at odds with.
But you can nail him about the right here and right now.
Yeah, but when he says Moses and Jesus were Muslims, it's like, okay, history is gone out the window.
He's absolutely right, and I'll explain to you why. Islam is a replacement. His Islam is a replacement theology. It replaces Judaism, which was sequentially replaced by Christianity, and we still deal with some replacement Christians, and there are problems still today.
Sure.
Islam replaces everything. We are guilty. That's where dimitude comes from. It comes from the Arab verb dama, to blame. We are guilty of falsifying our scriptures to write Muhammad out. That's what we did.
Yeah, and so when you hear him, I really felt like, Anjem, what is 2 + 2? 2 + 2 is Islam. What do you get when you mix purple and green? Islam.
Which one of you asked?
Everything was Islam.
Who asked, what has Islam ever done for us?
That was my question.
Okay, you could have phrased it exactly like the life of Brian. But it's true. But he's got a long list, and he really believes his long list of all the achievements.
Jesus was a gift of Islam, and Moses was a gift of Islam. Yes,
exactly.
Of course. Everything was a gift of Islam. Anyway, we're here with Brian of London and Ari and Jeremy. We're going to go out for a short break. And we're really, I hope, going to delve into something a little bit deeper in the next half. I have an insight, and stay tuned, because I think you're going to like it.
This is
Inspired Radio. Ari and Jeremy here, broadcasting live from Jerusalem. We have Brian of London here with us in the studio. We're sort of analyzing our last interview with Anjem Choudary. And one of the parts that I found fascinating, and really Tehila pointed this out to me, because a few times he said, Islam has a wonderful view of how the world should be. Everyone, all people, Muslims and non-Muslims, should have dignity, clothing, and shelter. And Tehillah said, really, clothing and shelter for everyone? Like, that's what they have to offer. Imagine going to Switzerland and saying, hey, Switzerland, you're like the average welfare state. We'll give you shelter and clothing in the worldview of Islam. Like, that's what they have to offer. And therefore,
I'm listening.
Right? And so then what is the worldview of the afterlife? Well, it better be a hell of a lot better than food and shelter. Is that all that there is clothing and shelter? And yet that was pretty much the vision. But if you think about it, 800, 900 years ago when Islam was established, it's really only centuries old. It's like such a brand new religion.
Which is why it's so funny that he says like Moses and Abraham. Or
But at that time, clothing and shelter was a big deal. If they could actually provide clothing and shelter for all people that, and many times were struggling with famine, many times were struggling with life here in the Middle East, that would have been quite an accomplishment. And the most interesting thing for me is that talking to him was almost like going back in time. It was like entering into a time warp, talking with someone from the year 300 or 400 and saying, well, what is life like now? And life hasn't really changed much since then. And it's wonder, because now we are like these, modern ways of pluralistic societies and our, postmodern acceptance of everyone's views. And his views are still like, no, if you do not believe like me, I will kill you. But what's changed from then until now is now we have biological warfare, chemical warfare, we have nuclear bombs being given over to people who are still living in the consciousness of the year 400 or 500. And that really spells disaster for the free world.
So go ahead, Brian.
Well, you know what? I've had this long line I've used for a long time. It's like Islam is this bungee cord, and it's tying people to the 7th century. And what we've had is we've had some parts of Islam stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch away from the 7th century. Like Turkey under Ataturk in the sort of late 50s and 60s. Even Afghanistan, Kabul was a sort of modern-looking city. Beirut, they ran and they stretched this bungee cord, but eventually, at some point, something happens and wing, out comes Anjem Choudary and pulls you back to the 7th century.
Well, what is it that's pulling them back? That's not allowing them to evolve?
Again, that goes into their theology. Immutable word of God. Maybe they haven't got the internal systems necessary to change what they're reading. Like, we came with this rabbinical system of sitting up late into the night arguing about stuff and coming to the conclusion that no, all right, it's written in a book that, death to homosexuals, but we're just not going to do that stuff.
Even then, an eye for an eye didn't actually mean go poke out his eye. It was obviously a constant interpretation.
It was about levels. It was about not being excessive. It was about restraining yourself.
Very frequently I say on the show that I'm envious of the times of the Irgun and the Haganah because there's such a clear cause to establish the Jewish state. And then I look at them and I think that's one of their strengths, that these guys, when you look in their eyes, they are fiercely dedicated to this religious messianic mission of a global caliphate jihad. And that is just, it's like it lights you up to have a mission always in front of you that's so clear-cut, black and white. What's our mission? It's not as clear what exactly we need to be doing. So go ahead.
You asked a great question that he didn't answer because he was cut off, which was, if Islam is this great thing, why are you so insecure that you have to kill people who try to leave?
I have to give credit. That was Ari's question.
That was okay,
fantastic question.
And it gets the nail of it. Look, we make it like damn near impossible to become Jewish. I mean, it's really
so annoying. You want to be a convert, get ready.
And I've got two very good convert friends. I mean, one who went to study Catholic theology and wound up converting. He said, I studied your stuff. It just appears to be right. The Catholics. Okay, but they make it very easy and very beguiling, and it's a safety thing. It wraps people in this certainty. Just like you said, it's like a drug. It's like I want certainty in my life. I want to know what to do next.
And when you see someone like that, you just want to be like, hey, dude, I'm on your side. I'm with you, man. You do it. That's why I felt this thing in my gut. The whole time I wanted to be like, you want to cut my head off and you can't do it. Just like putting salt in the wound of this guy that he can't cut everybody's head off, that I'm here in Jerusalem and just deconstructing Islam and deconstructing Islam and embarrassing him and exposing him for what he is. And there's just nothing that he can do about it. And I know it just gets his blood boiling, which is why a lot of people wrote me and said that they liked it when I said, listen, Anjem, in the end of the day, you're in England and we're here in Jerusalem.
Right. What is a better testimony to who God is with than that?
Yeah.
But I want to say, like, even more than clarity, to me it seems as though the ISIS videos, they're tapping into, I mean, I don't want to get too Star Wars-y, but if there's a dark side of the Force and a light side of the Force, and in Jewish terms we would say the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination and the good inclination, when they're sort of tapping into go and get violent, go and get sex slaves, go and chop off people's heads, it's like tapping into the barbarian within man that man does have, and especially if you go to prisons where the real violent men kind of hang out, it's the fastest growing religion.
But everybody also
prison.
wants to be good and wants to be close to God, so it's a way of saying be a massacring barbarian that rapes women, and not only that, that's going to get you into
you're
paradise.
Going to go to heaven.
You're going to go to heaven for it.
So
exactly.
It's really like tapping into the weakness within man, and obviously sometimes, especially obviously in the prisons, that's where they sort of congregate. But it's really sort of like not just the Torah is constantly sort of giving charity, constantly like overcoming yourself, constantly sort of guiding you towards compassion, guiding you towards kindness. And here there's a religion that's justifying barbarism.
But I want to ask Brian, you said that you wanted to move away from Islam, and you've been doing that, and sometimes you dabble back in the dark side. But what do you do? What do you focus on now?
Well, I went through a phase of writing about better place cars because I've got one. And
how did that go for you?
That was I still drive the thing, but I have to borrow my wife's car now to get here. But again, that was a positive thing, and I'd rather talk about the positivity of Israel, the great things that Israel is doing in the world. So, that's what our blog is.
And from your perspective, is that mostly technology and
it's mostly everything. It's medicine, it's technology, it's giving an example to the world of what a tiny little people can do when they take back. We have a guy who writes on our blog. I like talking about him, Ryan Bellerose. He's a native American. I mean, native Canadian. I don't know. The terminology is funny. He's come with this wonderful, way of talking about us. We are indigenous, and he's measured us against, the tests of indigeneity of the Native Americans, and says we tick all the boxes, and we're the only indigenous people who've ever got our land back after thousands of years. Really got it back. Full control. We run the show.
What type of feedback do you get?
Great. From that kind of stuff, great, huge feedback. Because what you're doing is you're giving people who love Israel another way to talk to. Look, you can't talk to Anjem Choudary, okay? You can't talk to his followers. And you can't talk to the hardcore, real haters. But you talk to this vast middle swathe of people who just don't know what to think. And if they're being fed the BBC line all the time, or Crescent News Network in America, they get this negative only view of Israel. And you start to give people little positive glimmers that they can give, that they can say they're friends. But you know what? Israel does have pluralism. Israel does allow Arabs to vote. Israel's got Supreme Court judges who are Arabs. And it's just not an issue here.
Sure. Well, I guess this is the big question that I've been thinking about since the interview. We've dealt with evil before in Jewish history, and, we didn't like what the Nazis were doing, and we bombed Dresden.
Correct.
And when Japan joined them, well, we bombed Japan. But today, they're in England.
Can I tell you a story about Japan?
Please.
It follows on from because you talked about this Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I have another story this is from an inside thing. After the bombings of the two cities, and basically when General MacArthur set up his headquarters in Tokyo, he had a choice to make. He could either, the highest point in Tokyo at the time was the Palace of the Emperor. And he thought long and hard about whether to take the emperor out of his palace or not. And he didn't. He left the emperor in his palace. But he set up his headquarters in the Imperial, what's become now the Imperial Hotel. But he added 2 floors onto the top of it so that he would be higher than the emperor. You know that? Submission. He made them humbled. He totally demolished them physically.
Forced the white flag. Forced them to raise it.
And that's a brilliant story, and that's a very important lesson in history that I've never heard.
I've never heard that because he doesn't care about that, but he understands that they do. He was